Hey guys, welcome to the vlog. So let's get into it. In this vlog, I'm going to cover two things. Number one, best computer to program with in 2018. Now, you wouldn't figure it's changed much since 2017, but this is a question I get asked not all the time, but fairly often. So I figure I'm going to address it here. And the second thing I'm going to talk about is Rails for startups, Ruby and Rails for startups. The question that was put to me is whether or not it would have an impact in terms of whether VCs were more likely to invest in your business if your web app was based on Ruby on Rails. And the other question is, would Ruby on Rails be a good choice in terms of achieving MVP? MVP is short for minimum viable product. This is an old concept that any entrepreneurs should know, and I've talked about that in other vlogs. Basically, the idea is you want to get a product out as quickly as possible, minimum viable product, so that you can see whether or not the market likes your product, and then you can start iterating, start making the changes that are necessary. Anyway, let's get into number one. So the first thing, best computer in 2018. Well, that comes down to a few things. Number one, it comes down to the type of programming you want to do. So generally speaking, computers these days, whether it be Windows-based, Mac, Linux, not so much Chromebooks. Chromebooks are not necessarily the best thing to program with. I'm sure you can hack something out. I wouldn't use Chromebooks. But yeah, in terms of Windows, Mac, or Linux, they're all neck and neck. Of course, everybody's got their preferences. People will argue that Linux and Mac are better for developers because they got the built-in command line tools. This is true, and they're Linux-based, of course, and a lot of the servers you're going to be interacting with, most of us are Linux-based. So there is an argument that having a Linux computer talking to a Linux server might have certain advantages. Very limited in my opinion. When it comes down to it, just go with whatever type of computer that you're comfortable with. That said, I do use Macs most of the time, although I do have a Windows machine. There's one thing you have to consider though. When you are writing software for .NET, if you're going to be writing .NET, which is Windows-based, Microsoft framework for building apps, then it would be silly to do it in anything but Windows. So if you're doing .NET, C#, you want to do that kind of stuff, probably best to use Windows. I don't even know if you could do it on Mac. You might be able to using the Mono project. I haven't looked into it. That said, if you're doing .NET programming, whether it be ASP.NET or whatnot, you're going to be using Windows, makes sense. If you're going to be doing iOS or watchOS or macOS programming, of course you're going to have a Mac. And yeah, so Linux, again, for general purpose programming. But beyond that, I don't see any major disadvantage or advantage overall, whether you go for Windows machine or you go with a Mac or a Linux machine. In terms of the actual hardware, you don't need powerful computers. Number one, I would be using a laptop, so you have that flexibility. Get a laptop and maybe an external monitor, no more desktops, not one of those all-in-ones. This way you can program depending where you want to go. One of the advantages of being a software developer is that you could go on a vacation. You could be in Florida, you could be in California, you could be in some island somewhere. As long as you have an internet connection, you could write code. So if you have a laptop, it'll allow you to take your work with you if you wanted to travel. So I always use laptops. I haven't had a desktop in many years now. It's because laptops give you that flexibility, and laptops are so powerful these days that you don't really need a desktop, especially for coding. These days, computers are so powerful, you could use a 5-6-year-old laptop and it'll be plenty powerful to do just about any type of coding that you want to do, especially given so many people program in dynamic languages, things like Python and PHP and JavaScript, languages that are not compiled, so you don't have to wait around for the compiler to do the compiling for you. But even then, if you were using a compiled language like a C or C++ or Java or something, computers are so fast. So in terms of hardware, you don't have to get the super fast. If you're going to get a brand new machine, I would always recommend get middle of the road. That's the best bang for your buck. So there you go, 2018. All operating systems are good, depending on the type of work. Computers are so fast, but get a laptop. All right, let's talk about Rails and Ruby on Rails in terms of building an app. It will be a web app, of course. You want to get funding by some VCs. And the question that was put to me, at least as far as I can interpret, is whether or not having it written in Ruby on Rails is going to make it more interesting to the VC company, to the venture capital business. I don't think so. I think that it's the last thing they look at. As long as your code base is clean and you got a good team behind the code base, they're not going to really care what you write it in, generally speaking, whether it be Ruby's or JavaScript or PHP or Java. As long as your app works, they're much more concerned about the viability of the app, the viability of the team, how level-headed you are, how realistic you are, how dependable you are, and whether or not your product has traction in the marketplace. So in terms of what VCs will think, I really doubt they're going to care too much, except for what I told you. They're going to want clean code base. They want you to be able to use modern architectures. They don't want you to be leveraging some really old stuff. And that's pretty much it as far as I've seen and heard. In terms of MVP, minimum viable product, what's going to get you there quick? Well, any of the modern development platforms will do that for you, whether it be Rails and Ruby, PHP, Laravel, .NET, and ASP.NET, I guess, although it might be heavy, meaning it might be slower to development because it's just a chunkier platform. Python, Django, example, Node.js and JavaScript, all these frameworks and languages will get you there pretty quickly, although I'm not a huge advocate of using JavaScript on the server yet with Node because I think that that whole environment's a little immature still. Libraries are changing quickly. You might have to mess around with a lot of configurations where you wouldn't with mature platforms like PHP, Laravel, or Ruby Rails, Python, Django. In terms of those 3 or 4, which ones are superior, inferior, depends on your particular skill set, depends on what you're looking to do. For startups, for small business, I'm always a big advocate of PHP because it's the fastest at runtime for those languages that I've talked about, and it's really easy to get up and running with a PHP Laravel-based system. And it's very advanced in terms of what it can do in its feature set. I haven't mentioned Java because Java is heavy duty, meaning that though it's very capable, you're going to have to write a lot more Java code to get something done versus Ruby Rails or PHP Laravel, etc. So I'm not a big advocate of using Java in the startup space. Java should be something that you only do Android with, and that's going to be fading, I think, in time with this new language built on top of Java. I think it's called Kotlin, I forget all of a sudden, and it's like kind of like this Kotlin, a Kotler, if you can look it up. It is Java's version of Swift. Swift replaces Objective-C for iOS app creation, and Kotlin or Kotler, I think it's Kotlin, is the same thing. It's a lighter language from Java, and you're able to get the job done, and Google just gave the thumbs up to that particular language. I haven't looked at it, so I don't know. But of course, when you're doing a lot of these mobile apps, I'm a big advocate of looking at the web stack first because most mobile apps can be built with web tech, with a translation layer, rather than having to go native, which is going to save you a lot of time in terms of your programming. If you don't understand this, don't worry about it. You get it. Just check out my other vlogs. I talk about this in detail. So yeah, in terms of getting out a minimum viable product, any of the modern scripting languages, that's what we used to call them, Python, JavaScript, PHP, they'll get you there super fast because they're all very mature these days. And in terms of whether or not a VC, a venture capital firm, will value your app more because it's written in Rails versus Python, Django, I don't think so. I think they're just going to be concerned about whether or not the code base is clean and well written. And you're probably going to get some code inspections at some point. But what they're much more concerned about is how your team functions, how you functions, if you have traction with your app, and if you're a realistic founder. Keep that in mind. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this vlog. Bye-bye.